in being the strongest performers on economic management. Australia now has a $1 trillion debt. Gross debt has been rising every single year since the coalition came into power in 2013. Highest inflation in 20 years. Wages are actually going backwards. The coalition has promised $7.2 billion in new spending during this election campaign, compared to Labor's $947 million. Can you actually claim superiority on the economic management when you consider all those other facts?
Well, just to correct you on a number of counts, the new spending you're referring to is about flood assistance that we actually allowed for in the budget. So we said, it's not actually. It's not. We said that we would make there was an expectation of about $6 billion worth of flood assistance that was to be provided, and then those were further announcements that were made. With respect to debt, I'm glad you asked that question. We balanced the budget for the first time in 11 years going into the pandemic. And then Australia was hit by the single biggest economic shock since the Great Depression. And you may not have noticed, but the Australian economy effectively went into hibernation in March and April last year. When it did, we took steps that no previous government have taken. We took steps to put an economic security blanket across the economy. The net result was that instead of having an unemployment rate at 15%, we have an unemployment rate today at 4%. And when you look at the Labor Party's record on jobs, unemployment rose from 4.4 to 5.7% under them. It is 4% under us. And when Australia went through a previous recession in the 1990s, we saw unemployment elevated for up to a decade after. And what the economists call the scarring of the labour market took effect, which meant that young people leaving university or leaving high school and trying to enter the labour market did not have jobs available to them. Today, the biggest complaint of employers is there's not enough workers to fill the jobs that they have. Australia's economic recovery has been faster and stronger than all of the major advanced economies. In the United States, there are 1.5 million fewer Americans in work today than since the start of the pandemic. Yet in Australia, there are 400,000 more Australians in work today since the start of the pandemic. And only recently, the global economic outlook was downgraded, yet the Australian economic outlook was upgraded by the international bodies. That goes to the inherent resilience and strength of the economy. I'm very pleased that you asked me about the overall debt position, because we had to take steps to shield the economy from the full effect of the COVID pandemic. That has led to a higher debt burden. But it would have been a lot higher if we listened to the Labor Party and did not bring JobKeeper to an end when we did. If we did not end the COVID disaster payments, which the Labor Party complained that we ended when we did. If we would have taken Anthony Albanese's advice to go and waste $6 billion of your money, of taxpayers' money, to pay people to get the jab even though they've had the jab. We took important steps to shield the economy, and it worked. And the net result was in the budget just over 2 weeks ago. We saw more than $100 billion improvement to the budget bottom line, the fastest fiscal consolidation in Australia in more than 70 years. We saw deficits as a share of the economy more than halve over the forward estimates, and then more than halve again over the medium term. And we saw debt as a share of the economy peak more than 5 percentage points lower and 4 years earlier than we were initially forecasting. That showed that the momentum in the economy, with more people in work and less people on welfare, was occurring. And you have to bear in mind the size of the economic shock that Australia confronted. And you have to understand that the pandemic is not over and that we are seeing higher inflation. And we are still seeing supply chain disruptions. Wood and steel prices and oil prices and gas prices and wheat prices are higher than previous. But that is largely as a result of international factors that will hopefully ameliorate over time. And that's what Treasury has pointed to. But if you talk to any of the leading economists as to Australia's macroeconomic outlook, it is overwhelmingly positive. There's more than $400 billion that's been accumulated on household and business balance sheets that was not there at the start of the pandemic. And this money will be continued to be spent across the economy as the savings ratio comes down as health restrictions are eased. So if you ask me, do I regret any of those steps that we took to save the economy? I don't. We took more than 1,000 individual decisions, whether it was $18 billion to underwrite the domestic enrolments in our universities, whether it was the work that we undertook with Home Builder to ensure that there were jobs in the construction industry and on those long supply chains, whether it was underwriting the freight routes to move pharmaceuticals between states because tourists weren't hopping on planes and so planes weren't going from Melbourne to Sydney, whether it was the work that we did with the zoos and the aquariums and the other wildlife sanctuaries to feed the animals because tourists weren't going in there, where it was the cash flow boost that provided more than $30 billion to small businesses to support them, whether it was the work that we did with the prudential regulator and the commercial banks that saw $250 billion worth of loans not needing to be repaid during the heat of the crisis, whether it's the other work that we have done with JobKeeper, which saved more than 700,000 jobs, or the heaps of regulatory changes that we undertook right across the economy, whether it was virtual AGMs because people couldn't meet, or electronic signatures because people couldn't go and sign the documents in the presence of others. There are an enormous number of major decisions that our government took across the complex ecosystem that makes up the economy. And the net result of that is an unemployment rate today equal lowest in 48 years, with Treasury forecasting that it will have a 3 in front of it for the first time in 50 years. So I'm extremely proud of what our government, the Morrison government, has been able to achieve over the last few years, of what 26 million Australians have been able to achieve. But what we do know is we're not out of the woods yet, and there are some difficult times, and the economy is front and centre, because when you have a strong economy, you can pay for the essential services and guarantee those that people rely and expect, and you can fund our national security and defence, which is more important than ever. You can invest in the infrastructure projects which will grow our economy and create more jobs. That's what my focus is on. That's what our government's focus is on.